Welcome to the graveyard. Please keep your voices down. It's a very somber place. You can feel the sadness here, the pain, the things left unsaid. In that sense, it's not unlike every other graveyard all across the world. But of course, we wouldn't be covering it here if it wasn't just any graveyard, would we? The eagle-eyed among you may notice that we're walking through a military cemetery for starters, but the people buried here aren't the martyrs of any war your history teacher would tell you about. The people and entities interred here fought their wars in the shadows. They died in the dark, so we could live in the light. But who are they? What is this place? Who are the people buried here really? To find that out, we need to take a step back. It began in Site-43, specifically Laboratory 37 of Site-43's Artificial Intelligence Wing. Researchers were conducting a series of tests on a few classified artificial intelligence anomalies with the help of a Foundation-made artificial intelligence construct known as Marvin. However, what was meant to be a set of routine cognition tests turned into a mass containment breach, believed to be coordinated by several of the rogue AIs involved. Things went sideways quickly. The breach resulted in the deaths of 3 members of security personnel, and it was only stopped when Marvin and a more benevolent anomaly worked together to get things back under control. While their efforts were valiant, they weren't enough to save Marvin himself, who was rendered inoperable during the breach. All of the copies of the anomalous AIs were neutralized after testing was complete. Under the orders of the site director, the remaining materials relating to Marvin and the neutralized anomalies were left in Laboratory 37. Things appeared to be returning to normal until maintenance personnel entered the lab later that day. You can undeniably encounter some pretty strange things inside an SCP Foundation laboratory. It comes with the territory. But when you walk into a lab and find yourself standing in a giant military cemetery, it's probably time to contact your supervisors and let them know. While those maintenance workers didn't truly comprehend what they'd discovered, the Foundation researchers who got involved shortly afterward were able to take in the full scope of it. An ever-expanding extra-dimensional graveyard, seeming to exist outside of space and time as we understand it, which soon became known to the Foundation as SCP-2783. The cemetery is believed to currently contain over 1 million graves. That's over double the mere 400,000 buried at Arlington National Cemetery. These graves are meticulously arranged into huge square grids, each one containing around 90,000 graves apiece. This would be peculiar enough in its own right, but things got a whole lot stranger. Each grave is clearly marked with a name and an epitaph, but ground-penetrating radar tests conducted by the Foundation revealed that only 30% of the graves actually contain human remains, and the remaining 70% are currently empty. And considering that the number of graves actually seems to be increasing at an arbitrary rate, it isn't difficult to draw the conclusion that some event in the near future is destined to fill these empty graves. Perhaps a war like one we've never seen is on the horizon, and SCP-2783 is growing in preparation to house its teeming casualties. Death is a funny thing. It can have varied and unpredictable faces in the eyes of its beholders, and the great SCP-2783 cemetery is no exception to this rule. It appears slightly different to all who view it, even when viewing it at the same time. Factors like climate and weather are dictated by the place of a person's origin. The same goes for the style of the grave markers. They seem to be culturally specific to the beholder's view of what a military grave marker tends to look like, and the epitaphs are written in the native language of whoever sees them. It is a truly universal cemetery, a place where anyone and everyone can come and grieve the courageous fallen with equal understanding and respect. The Foundation has been able to use GPS tracking to locate the graveyard's equivalent on our planet, tracing it back to an ancient tomb in southern Iraq. There, the Foundation collaborated with the ORIA, the Organization for the Reclamation of Islamic Artifacts, to investigate further. The mission discovered a number of artifacts belonging to several previously undocumented pre-Mesopotamian civilizations, but failed to uncover any physical evidence of SCP-2783 at this site. The cemetery is marked off by a fence that seems impossible to penetrate. Those who walk through the door in Laboratory 37 manifest just outside of a gate built into the fence. However, any attempt to walk back through this gate will simply lead to the subject exiting back through the doors to Laboratory 37. Thankfully for any Foundation staff who left something they actually needed in Laboratory 37, the teleportation does not affect machines, so remote-controlled robots can still be sent into the lab. Shortly after discovering SCP-2783, reconnaissance teams were sent in to start cataloging the grave markings. As concerning information started to pour in, the Foundation upped the security clearance on both physical and informational access to SCP-2783. Nobody below Level 5 security clearance is able to see the full picture. So, what is the full picture? Well, at the risk of getting assassinated by the Red Right Hand, let's take a look at a few recorded grave markers and see if we can find out. Take grave AA00000, inscribed with the name YHWH, a potential shortening of the name Yahweh, a common alias of the Abrahamic God. The epitaph on the grave reads, "He was vital in her construction. His design shall prove vital in her reconstruction." However, there are multiple variants of this grave, and while all seem to memorialize some kind of creator deity, there seems to be no favoritism of any particular type of deity or any specific religious denomination. Sightings of variants of this gravestone have reached the double digits. Then there's grave AA00002, marked Hawa Bat Ashra, also known as Eve, the first woman. Her grave marking reads, "The serpent within the library bestowed upon her great wisdom. Her loss inspires us all to seek wisdom in this, the living world." It is believed by some that Ashra was the mother of Cain and Abel, SCP-073 and SCP-076, and also spent a period of time as O5-1, wishing to guide humanity in the right direction. How about grave AA00005, marked Lilith Bat YHWH, also known as SCP-336. Her epitaph reads, "She was loved greatly. Her beauty will not be forgotten." According to Foundation records, Lilith is a beautiful humanoid woman with reptilian legs, whose enchanting voice has the power to induce infertility in women, and a combination of comas and anomalous tumors in men. Anomalous in the sense that they will birth vicious, deadly chimeras. Next, grave AA00006, marked Set Ben Adam. His epitaph reads, "This graveyard was constructed under his orders. When those interred here rise again, it is under his command they shall fight." Set, or Seth, is also known as SCP-4840-A, a powerful sibling of Cain and Abel living in SCP-4840. How, when, or why he decided to order the construction of SCP-2783 is unknown. Then grave AB21917, marked Unknown. Their epitaph reads, "A crafter of the flesh and a disciple of the tongueless speaker, a worthy foe. His precious moments were expended on the hordes of the Crimson Crown, and so he is memorialized among the heroes of the people." Radars of the grave showed that the creature interred with had the biology atypical of a human. Our interpretation of the epitaph is that this was a follower of Sarkicism, the worship of the flesh, who worked with the Church of the Broken God and the SCP Foundation to fight against the Scarlet King, and died a hero as a result. Next, grave AL21343, believed to belong to Dr. Sophia Light. Her epitaph reads, "Our Savior and Prophet, our Staff and Shepherd. The Machine Goddess smiled upon this house, and even now, those who rest here are tended to." This is one of the many references to the Machine or Clockwork Goddess, an alternate title for Mechane, the deity of the Church of the Broken God. Evidence suggests that this cemetery was the work of the Church, and that all who are interred there were or are going to be aligned with the Broken God in the struggle against a far greater threat to us all. Next, AL30056 marked Nicholas Flamel with the epitaph, an esteemed scholar who rose to great heights, but like Icarus fell from great heights. While mythologically Flamel is believed to have been an alchemist and creator of the legendary Philosopher's Stone, the Foundation hasn't detected any confirmed anomalous activity connected to him. Of much greater interest to fans of this channel, we come upon AL41867, marked Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, his epitaph reading, "His service to the advancement of science and humanity shall carry on." A full-sized human skeleton lays in the grave, so perhaps Lord Blackwood's service did carry on, just in a different body. Then came the grave of Private Pyotr Avtukov, whose epitaph reads, "He and his fellows have seen the gates of hell. Though they do not deserve it, they shall be first to greet the hordes of the Crimson Crown when the gates open." Fans of this channel may remember Private Avtukov from our coverage of SCP-180. He was one of the soldiers involved in the horrific ordeal of the anomalous Battle of Hustian Woods. Another name you might recognize is the one carved into grave marker AM21450, Dr. Alto Clef. That's right, everyone's favorite lovable loose cannon. His epitaph reads, "A loving father, he gave much more than was demanded of him." The variants of his grave also list his other aliases, Agent Ukulele and Adam El Assem, the First Man. The date of his death corresponds with a recorded near-containment breach that resulted in the deaths of 2 other members of personnel. Clefcheat's death another day, for now. And the most recent grave, AM21488, was the grave of Marvin, the AIC that helped save the day during the containment breach that opened the portal to SCP-2783. His epitaph reads, "A machine mind that gave his life to protect his builders, just as the machine goddess before him. There will always be a place in paradise for those who gave of themselves as he did." It is somewhat heartwarming to know that, in the eyes of the Clockwork goddess, a mere AI can be revered just as much for heroism as anyone constructed from flesh and blood. Recorded back in 2017 during a routine search, Agent Philip McLean saw 13 humanoid entities in funeral garb, with an insignia described as a white circular shield with 3 equidistant protrusions. Inside the shield were 3 equidistant black arrows piercing a white circle outlined in black. These entities performed what seemed to be funeral rites before committing another body to the dirt below. The name on the new grave marker was Captain Karin Michelle Hollis, Mobile Task Force Zeta-9. Her epitaph read, "She died in a strange and faraway place, with a smile on her face, a weapon in her hand, and foes on all sides. She exemplified what all warriors should strive to be." For those of you that can remember our 3-part series on SCP-1730, you may also remember that Captain Hollis was the brave MTF leader who sacrificed her own life in the terrible bowels of Site-13 to turn on the Thresher machine, kicking the whole awful place to another dimension. Here, her heroic sacrifice can never be forgotten. While there's an ominous subtext to a lot of SCP-2783, from its predictions of individual deaths to hints at a bloody war with the Scarlet King coming down the tracks, there's something undeniably beautiful about the idea of this place. We share in the mourning and reverence of the Clockwork goddess, of heroes great and small, gone but never forgotten. In SCP-2783, no act of courage or sacrifice will ever be lost to time. Be sure to leave quietly on your way out. Like we said before, this is a somber place. Even before she was a fully fledged doctor, Kate Barker always had a fascination for the outdoors. Growing up, being out among nature felt like she was connected to the wider world, one part of a larger whole. She intuited from a very young age that the Earth had a system in place, full of millions, if not billions of parts that all work together in the hopes of achieving perfect balance. Humans, animals, and insects, right down to the germs that were so small they couldn't be seen unless under a microscope. And then, of course, there were the plants, trees, flowers, and all manner of other flora that provided the world with so much more than making it look beautiful. And it was so much so that a young Kate wanted to devote her life to helping maintain our beautiful little blue and green planet and understand every part of it. The way she did that changed as the years went on. As a child, it was learning how trees take in carbon dioxide and water, then use the sun's energy to feed themselves and produce oxygen through a process known as photosynthesis. Then, in high school, Kate was writing and giving presentations on the importance of protecting the environment and conserving wildlife, trying to convince her classmates to see the world in the same way she did. By the time college rolled around, that protection took on a seemingly more proactive form, standing out on picket lines in protest when the college announced it would be chopping down its nearby woods to expand the campus. Eventually, she was made Dr. Kate Barker and awarded her PhD in botany and plant science. She thought that would be when the real work began. Having climbed her way up to achieving her degree was only the first step. The next would involve working tirelessly to keep the world's greenery alive. After all, Kate had studied for years, learning about anything and everything to do with plant life, their different functions and structures, how each species had evolved and could be classified, and how they all formed part of the planet's ecosystem. Unfortunately, even for those with the noblest of intentions, the harsh, unforgiving laws of reality can tend to get in the way. In Kate's case, that came in the form of being snapped up for a job at a genetic research company. Sure, on the one hand, she did get to rely on all the information she had learned on her way to earning her PhD, but on the downside, all Kate got to use her knowledge for was receiving and tending to various plant samples. Getting asked occasionally to run tests on said samples was about the pinnacle of excitement in her job. Somehow, despite working with plants, Dr. Barker couldn't help but feel further away from nature than she had ever been. That was until an unusual specimen was brought to her department for analysis, something unlike anything Kate had seen in all her years of research and study. Although she didn't know it at the time, this unique plant would bring Dr. Barker closer to nature in a way she could never have imagined, because it was a sample of SCP-306. Of course, at the time, and even after the plant's anomalous properties began to take effect, Kate was completely unaware of this. When it was first brought to her lab, it seemed like just an ordinary fungus. No one had been able to successfully identify it, however. But if anyone could, Dr. Kate Barker was perhaps the best qualified person. "Where was it found?" she asked the lab technician as he handed her the sample secured in a sealed, airtight container. "Pretty close to here, apparently," the lab tech replied. "Louisiana swamps are always full of mushrooms and stuff like this, right?" "Yes, that's true. There are quite a few different fungi native to Louisiana," Kate answered instinctively, like her brain was on autopilot. She was more focused on examining the sample in the box than the conversation. Thing is, no one knows what kind this is, or if it's dangerous. I heard a rumor the locals used to call it frog rot, but apparently that was an older name for it," the technician added, garnering a little more than a mumble of agreement from the doctor of botany. Kate placed the clear Perspex container near the window, letting the natural light of the outdoors give her a better look at what was inside. It was a portion of a dead tree, its bark soggy and darkened from the swamp water. Growing out of its side was a cluster of the mysterious fungus in question, looking more like pustules or a cyst, a tumor growing out of the dead wood, as if it had drained the bigger plant of all of its life. Kate's next few hours were spent taking samples of the fungus, keeping her hands and face covered as she scraped away parts of it to examine under her microscope. There was little abnormal about it on a cellular level, nothing in testing to suggest that the sample was toxic or directly harmful. All Kate could decipher about the plant was that it was related to a certain genus of fungi, known as Trichophyton, which includes the same parasitic varieties of fungus that can cause athlete's foot, ringworm, and similar infections in humans. Still unable to fully identify the species, Kate decided to take a closer look at how it was growing. Putting the container behind a safety screen, she opened it up and began to pull apart the sodden tree bark with her gloved hands. There was definitely some kind of mass underneath the bark, what Kate initially assumed to be the wood of the tree that the fungus had taken root to. Nothing could have prepared her for how wrong she was. As the bark split apart and crumbled away, it revealed what was underneath: a cottontail swamp rabbit. The fungi took on even more of a tumor-like appearance when Dr. Barker saw that it was actually growing out of the rabbit's back, having actually taken root within the poor creature's body. As much as the sight of it was profoundly upsetting, even a little sickening, the scientists and Kate knew that this was all just part of nature taking its course. Once she got over the initial shock, It was even a little fascinating. Her botanical expertise was second to none, and through that knowledge, she knew that more fungi grew in damp conditions. But she had never seen any genus grow from the biological matter of another organism, dead nor alive. Could this mystery species grow in any biomass, even in a human being? Worried about that possibility, Kate went to store the SCP-306 sample until further testing could be conducted. As she placed it back in the container, her hand nudged one of the fungi's bulbs, causing it to expel a wisp of tiny spores. Not that she could see them, of course. They were microscopically small, but as they drifted through the air, the spores were drawn to Kate, up and towards where she was steadily breathing. The minute the spores slipped undetected into her airway, Dr. Barker immediately began coughing, feeling a disgusting earthy tang at the back of her throat. She couldn't stop spluttering, instinctively raising her hand to cover her mouth. Her rubber gloves were still covering her fingers, coating in even more invisible residue from the fungus. And now Kate was unknowingly breathing in more. Excusing herself from work from the rest of the day, Dr. Kate Barker went home feeling sicker and sicker as every minute passed. A fever was rapidly climbing, limbs were shuddering, and still she couldn't stop coughing and spluttering as she tried to expel a foul, lingering sensation that refused to leave her throat. But those weren't even the worst symptoms. 2 days had come and gone since the incident at the lab, and Kate still hadn't returned to her job. How could she? She felt awful and looked far worse. Large lesions had started appearing on her skin, rapidly turning into warts. Just looking at them made Kate's stomach turn, and on a few occasions, poking at them and feeling these alien lumps on her skin caused her to vomit. Every night she would go to bed, her body rapidly switching from sweltering hot, then becoming cold enough to cause Kate to shiver uncontrollably. At first it looked like the lesions were clearing, falling away from her skin soon after they had fully formed into warts. But the fleeting bit of hope that gave her was quickly wiped away when new ones started to grow in their place. This didn't just feel like the flu, or any other type of sickness for that matter. It felt painful on the deepest, tiniest level. During what little restless sleep she did get, Kate kept having nightmares about doctors looking at her cells under a microscope, watching them changing into something else. It had been over 2 weeks since she had first been exposed to SCP-306's spores, and still, she hadn't been well enough to get back to work. Each time Kate had called the Human Resources Department to inform them that she still wasn't any better, they always came out with the same advice. Drink plenty of fluids, try to eat, and keep your strength up. Dr. Barker hadn't stopped eating or drinking, albeit at a very slightly reduced rate. Her appetite had been sapped, along with most of her energy, although she had noticed that she dropped a significant amount of weight in an alarmingly short amount of time. 3 weeks later, Kate flicked on the bathroom light and barely recognized herself. Not only was she no longer at a healthy weight, but her skin. Something was very wrong with her skin. She had developed an abnormal pigmentation, a yellowish-greenish hue, almost like she had somehow developed jaundice. But to the touch, it felt a strange, almost rubbery texture. In fact, if she hadn't felt so sick, Kate would have noticed that her skin wasn't absorbing water the way it was used to either, displaying the same type of permeability as the skin of most amphibians. 2 months had gone past, and nobody at the research company had heard a word from Kate. She wasn't answering her phone. A few of them were asked to go to her apartment to check on her, but she never came to the door either. None of them had any idea what had happened. They certainly didn't know about the changes that her body had undergone, and none of them painlessly either. The constant pain Kate had been feeling had gradually built and built until it felt like parts of her body were twisting and contorting against her will and in unnatural ways. With the grinding feeling of her bones pulling each other as they shrank, her limbs were racked with unbearable agony. At the same time, her stomach had shrunk to the point where she wasn't even able to eat anymore. The same reduction was occurring to the rest of her organs too. Heart, liver, lungs, brain, everything was getting smaller, shrinking organs imprisoned within a skeleton that was also decreasing in size. Then, one morning, the pain had seemingly stopped. After a night spent screaming in sheer agony, tears streaming down her face, Kate woke up on the floor of her apartment under a pile of her clothes. But as she awoke, she instantly noticed something. Everything looked bigger. The whole room towered above her like she had been reduced down to the size of something much smaller than a human. She tried opening her mouth to say something, anything, but her lips couldn't form words anymore. Her arms felt strange, too, like their reach was somehow much shorter. The same with her legs that were now tucked under her body, her tiny, rubbery-skinned body. SCP-306 had turned her into a frog. It took Kate almost an entire day to figure out how to properly move around, first needing a long time to emotionally process what had happened to her. If she had still been able to, she would have been sick and cried endlessly, wailing on the floor. Instead, when she tried to make any noise, a tiny croak was all that emanated from the back of her hoarse throat. But before she could find a way to leave her apartment, something else found their way in. From way down on the floor, the men in their white hazard suits looked colossal, impossibly tall. Kate tried her best to dodge between the thick soles of their heavy boots as they came crashing down towards her from above, each one having enough force behind it to crush her in an instant. She leaped out of the way of one descending boot, only to be caught mid-air in a glass container. As the lid screwed tightly shut, sealing her inside, Kate was lifted up and saw a patch of the hazmat uniforms of the men that had come to take her away. A black circle with 3 arrows pointing in towards its center and an outline surrounding it. The Foundation put her in a glass tank with 11 other frogs, each of them looking almost identical to Kate, all climbing over each other, fighting for their own space in the tiny enclosure. From the moment she arrived, Kate could see the same thing in their gaze as they could see in hers. Sadness, unmistakable even in those dark, beady little eyes. These were people, or at least they had been human beings at some point. But now anything on the outside that had made them unique, their individuality, had been taken away, and their minds had all been locked inside the same frog-shaped body as Kate now found herself in. Over the next few months, the Foundation had their scientists running a series of tests on the frogs, who were now all categorized under the collective designation of SCP-306-1. Even though she was unable to speak, Kate recognized their methodical scientific process, how they would test 1 or 2 of the frogs at a time, note the results, then change a variable and repeat the test to see if there were any changes. It was the same process she used to go through every time a new sample arrived at her lab. Watching the researchers reminded her of her old job, the life she'd worked so hard for, and was cruelly reminded that it was all gone now. Nobody would ever know where she went. She'd never be able to go out amongst nature in the way that she had always loved. Kate had long since figured out the root cause of her transformation. A while after she had started to feel sick, she'd wonder if that strange fungus had anything to do with it. Seeing all the Foundation scientists and guards in their hazmat gear, only handling the other frogs with thick rubber gloves, seemed to prove her theory right, and suggested that she and her fellow amphibians were still infectious. Still, she currently had no way of communicating with the Foundation personnel about what had caused her to change, although they seemed as if they already knew. Most of the tests involved the researchers putting Kate and the other frogs into mazes or making them solve puzzles or memorizing commands. Naturally, having once been human, they all picked it up quicker than the researchers expected. From their perspective, these frogs were displaying an extremely advanced form of intelligence. Gradually, the testing progressed, and the Foundation's researchers began attempting to teach the frog specimens to read and write, all skills that they had already possessed, even if some of them needed some time to learn how to hold a pen in their new sticky fingers. Kate herself was made to complete an IQ test, scoring 127 points. Now that she had a way to communicate with these scientists through writing notes, she and the other SCP-306-1s were asked their names. That was the moment the Foundation realized what they were. These weren't just frogs, but human beings who were now trapped in the bodies of frogs. Perhaps inspired by this human-to-frog transformation, or possibly as some cruel joke, one of the Foundation researchers, who went by the name Thompson, brought in a children's book and presented it to the collection of SCP-306-1 specimens. At first, Kate enjoyed the simplicity of the stories, and it seemed her fellow frogs did as well, but gradually they all grew depressed. Maybe one of the stories featuring a prince being turned from a frog back into human form, while the 12 remaining specimens had yet to be presented with a magical cure for their condition. Or perhaps seeing something as simple as a children's book reminded some of the frogs of all they were still to do in their old lives, like starting families, and now they wouldn't get the chance. Kate and some of the other frogs began writing notes to Thompson and another of the researchers who had been feeding them, Phyllis. They did their best to be reasonable with the Foundation, but also communicate how desperately they wanted to be set free. "You have no right to keep us here," Kate wrote. Under the towering stare of Phyllis and Thompson, feeling for the first time in a long while that she was actively doing something to make a difference in nature. We need to be out in the world. We need to be free. If she had more space on the paper, she would have tried to note down suggestions of places the frogs could be introduced, where they wouldn't pose any risk of disrupting the local ecosystem. The swamps of Louisiana, where the SCP-306 fungus had been found, were one such idea that came to mind. But much to Dr. Kate Barker's disappointment, she and her fellow frogs would only cause the fungi's infectious properties to spread, meaning their pleas with the Foundation fell on deaf ears. There was no other choice, nothing else they could do. They needed to break out. As night fell, Kate organized the frogs, gradually writing out instructions for how they were going to escape, communicating with them the same way she had with the researchers. Only this time, the others listened. Even if they couldn't be human again, they didn't want to live the rest of their short lifespans being locked up and tested forever. Kate marked down the time that Thompson and Phyllis usually fed the frogs and drew up a detailed strategy. If she could hide for long enough under the others, it might make it seem like one of the specimens was missing. The next day, researcher Thompson and researcher Phyllis arrived to feed the SCP-306-1 specimens, accompanied by security guards as always. While her colleague went to collect the feed for her to administer, Phyllis did a count of the frogs. 11. She counted again, only to get the same result. There was one missing. As she leaned closer to the tank, Kate trusted her fellow amphibians above to follow the plan. In a flash, the mass of frogs had leaped from their containment and pinned Phyllis to the ground as one. The room erupted into chaos. People turned frogs, leaping in all directions as they scattered and made a mad dash for freedom. A gunshot rang out from one of the security guards trying to subdue the creatures, only for the stray shot to catch researcher Thompson in the neck, killing him. Leading the charge on her tiny rubbery legs, Kate jumped closer and closer to the exit. It was so close. If she could just get far enough away, she might finally be free to get back to nature. Deep in the Pacific Ocean, lurking far beneath the waves, there's a city that time forgot. A vast former metropolis that acted as a battleground for two gods, one above and one below. All that's visible above the water level is an island, less than 5 kilometers across, the lonely home of an entity that would look almost human to the untrained eye. You'd never guess she was thousands of years old. Perhaps you're wondering why you've never seen photos of this place. Strangely, it isn't just because of the containment efforts of the SCP Foundation. Anything but the most rudimentary ancient technology used on the island is liable to break the second you try to use it. The mechanism's flooded with seawater. But if you have any communication devices on you, you'll receive some strange messages on them before they stop working. Invader, run, murderer, and the enigmatic word, Naktumpkin. All of this would be strange enough already. But the deeper the Foundation delved into the island, the buried city, and their 1,000 secrets, the more dangerous the anomaly known as SCP-900 became. It began with Site-78, a Foundation site hidden within a decommissioned oil rig several miles beyond the effective range of SCP-900. At the time, the anomaly was believed to encompass the entire sunken city and the small island at its center. No facility could be constructed closer, partially to preserve the function of diagnostic equipment, and partially to avoid other more severe consequences too. More on that shortly. You'll find out just as violently and abruptly as the Foundation did. Wanting to know more about what exactly was going on the island, the research team requisitioned the help of Mobile Task Force GR-87, also known as the Analog Freaks. Their mission was to infiltrate the island directly and establish a base camp. Once this was achieved, they would communicate with the staff on Site-78 with the aid of a heliograph, a mirror that allowed people to communicate with each other remotely through reflecting light off of it at specific coded intervals. 4 team members arrived on the island together: Agent Tenor, Agent Penny, Agent Briggs, and Agent Saxony. It was meant to be a simple reconnaissance mission before everything went sideways, and 2 people died horrific deaths. When Tenor and his team arrived, he gave Penny and Briggs instructions to set up the heliograph, while he and Saxony prepared to investigate the island on foot. However, before any of them could get their bearings, as Agent Penny opened a tripod and steadied it against the sand, he collapsed to the ground and began to flail in what seemed like terrible agony. If this situation wasn't chaotic enough, just as Agent Briggs was desperately trying to help Agent Penny, Tenor noticed the humanoid entity cresting over the hill nearby. She came running towards them, pointing and screaming in a language that none of them understood. This was enough for Agent Saxony to make a fatal mistake, pulling out his service pistol and preparing to fire at the anomalous woman. However, just as his finger curled around the trigger, he let out an unimaginable scream of animal pain and collapsed down onto the ground, brown marks suddenly appearing on his skin like a network of veins. When Tenor tried to grab him and perform CPR, he was taken aback by the extreme heat coming off of Saxony's chest. Little did Tenor know at the time that attempting to perform violence against the only inhabitant of SCP-900 had caused his heart to literally burst into a terrible inferno inside his chest. Meanwhile, Penny writhed on the ground while Briggs tried to help him, doing mouth-to-mouth. Briggs would later state that she found an overwhelmingly salty taste in her mouth while trying, in vain, to save Penny, who then lurched forward and vomited up a salty red spew before keeling over and dying on the sand. Meanwhile, the roaring flames that had consumed Saxony's heart had now devoured his entire body, reducing him to little more than a burnt husk. For fear that the same would happen to the rest of them, Tenor and Briggs leapt onto the life raft and paddled away, knowing that even that would be preferable to either of the fates that he'd just watched his own comrades experience. This was how the Foundation learned that any human who attempted to build a structure on the island would suddenly find their lungs filling up with seawater, leading to them drowning inside the prison of their own body. And anyone who tries to commit harm against the island's single inhabitant. Tenor, in his debrief, recommended that the Foundation abandon this whole case and leave immediately. He had a gut feeling that this wouldn't end well for any of them. Naturally, this request was ignored. But if it hadn't been, who knows how many people would have been saved. Clearly, the Foundation would need to take a very different set of tactics if they hoped to get this island under wraps. They couldn't build the site any closer, as doing so would invite death, and they couldn't lead an assault against the island and the woman living on it for that very same reason. That was why they brought in senior researcher Dr. Catherine Kipp, whose language expertise would allow her to communicate with the humanoid in her own language, an otherwise dead tongue known as Burbak. In speaking to this mysterious entity, Dr. Kipp was given a number of tantalizing answers, and even more bizarre and frightening questions. What can you expect with an anomaly as weird, ancient, and dangerous as SCP-900? In the interview, the being claimed to have once gone by the name Kartika, a priestess of the sun. Naturally, Dr. Kipp asked Kartika about the meaning of that mysterious word, Naktumkin. Kartika claimed it was a sacred process to her long-extinct people, an ascendancy to become one with the sun goddess herself up above. But they had not always been devotees of the sun. Once they had been nocturnal creatures of the forests, locked in an endless battle with entities that Kartika had described as being almost like humans, but wild, more powerful. That rung Foundation alarm bells, and gave them a sense of just how far back this whole story went. These entities were known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-1000, and known to the general public as Bigfoot. These entities had once been the most powerful beings on Earth. They ruled it as a nocturnal kingdom. Humans and other species, such as Kartika's own, cowered at the fringes of reality, struggling to survive as the apes' advanced empire expanded relentlessly. In response to all this, humans and Kartika's species both took refuge in the aid of more powerful beings. For humans, it meant courting the patronage of a cruel trickster spirit of the forest, who gave them the tools to advance themselves at the cost of the grand species and civilization of SCP-1000. This reduced them to little more than beasts, stripped of even the intelligence that had allowed them to advance so far. Kartika's species took a different deal. They went out to the sea, where a great city was created for them at the behest of two gods, the god of the ocean and the goddess of the sun. The sun acted as the guide that allowed them to build the city, and the ocean acted as the defense that protected the city on all sides from hostile animals and dangerous spirits. When members of SCP-1000 tried to attack the city in great vessels, the ocean itself reared up and drowned them all. With the kindness of the two gods, it seemed that this place could be an eternal paradise for Kartika's people. But of course, how long could a good thing like that ever really last? Kartika spoke to Dr. Kipp many times, giving her answers, but always tempering them with what felt like half an answer and half like a threat. Kipp and her friend should leave the area, or soon something terrible would happen to them. just like had happened to their other bestial predecessors. Kip didn't get the sense that Kartika was making a threat over something that she herself would do, more that she was referring to some power far higher than her, the whims of the gods themselves. When Kip and the rest of the Foundation personnel did not heed this warning, Kartika returned again, hoping to tell them some dark memories of hers that were resurfacing in light of the human intrusion into her cursed land. She told Dr. Kip how there had once been harmony under the auspices of the sun and the sea, the one remaining structure on the island, an ancient ceremonial ziggurat, where the priestess of the sun had helped the people ascend to a sense of oneness with the blessed sun. Kartika seemed deeply emotional as she recounted the glory years of what her world had once been, saying, "The people gave back to their gods the best they could. The sun was given a temple atop the highest mountain, and the people listened to its teachings. The sea was given the dead as thanks for its protection. For a long time this was satisfactory, but slowly the sea became jealous of its twin." The point of contention came from a sense of dualism, the separation of the body and the soul. When anyone on the island died, their bodies were ritualistically cast into the sea so that the ocean god could claim them as a tribute. The problem was the souls became separated from their bodies upon death and floated skywards to the company of the sun, leaving the world of the ocean cold and lonely. After spending so long defending this civilization from the countless attacks of outsiders, the ocean god felt as though it had been cheated and would take its prize from the islanders by force. Immediately, terrible storms began to rock the island. Rain poured down, lashing against the surface of the island like torrents of freezing knives. Huge waves swallowed up the buildings along the coast, dragging entire families out into watery graves. It was an absolute massacre, and nobody had any idea who would be next. In response, many of the islanders decided to begin worshipping the ocean, giving it the validation it had so ardently desired. But that caused its own problems. The sun felt betrayed by these changes in loyalty, and like any vengeful god, she decided to smite the heretics, striking the island with sun rays that vaporized many of those who decided to go against the being that had once instructed them on how to build this very sanctuary. Now the islanders were effectively sandwiched between a pair of angry, petty gods, warring for dominance over their love and fealty. One of the sun priestesses was horrified by the violence that had consumed her home, and in the death of her people at the hands of the very deities that she had devoted her life to serving. She fell to her knees and wept, praying that the horrors would end and that her people would be safe. Kartika was on the verge of openly weeping as she said this, recounting with vivid detail. She said, "Inspired by the priestess's prayer for peace, the sea claimed the city its twin had built. There was no more to fight over. The sea left only a mountain, and the priestess who had inspired it. Seizing its followers at the last second, the sun banished the priestess from its realm. The sea provided her kindness for a time, but refused to take her lest the war begin anew. She lives on the mountain today, trapped." While by some metrics Dr. Kip was technically a genius, you really didn't need to be a genius to intuit that Kartika herself was the priestess in her own tale of woe. Sharing the knowledge that pained her so was Kartika's greatest hope of convincing Dr. Kip and the rest of the Foundation personnel to leave before a similarly awful fate befell them. The ocean, after all, had consumed everyone else who had tried in vain to conquer the land that it had swallowed up and laid claim to. This allowed Dr. Kip to understand, at the very least, some of the terrible things that had transpired on the ill-fated first mission from the analog freaks onto the island months ago at this point. When Agent Penny had attempted to build a structure on the island at the center of SCP-900, he had created an insult to the ocean that had claimed the island as its own. As such, he punished Agent Penny by transposing saltwater into his lungs and leading towards a terrifying and painful death. And as for Agent Saxony, in attempting to shoot Kartika in his state of panic, he was effectively attempting to steal a priestess from the sun. As such, the sun incinerated his heart as punishment, spreading the fire out through his body and destroying him entirely. Clearly, neither the sun nor the ocean likes it when you attempt to take what they believe to be their own. Something that everyone at Site-78 would soon realize. Just as Kartika had predicted, it wasn't long after she shared her memory that a terrible storm began to descend onto Site-78, one that could be seen from the site itself, but was somehow completely undetectable from above. Many radioed for help, but it seemed to do no good as the storm got closer and more powerful by the moment. Dr. Kip, perhaps frustrated by her own inability to heed the warning, commandeered a vessel and the few members of personnel closest to her. They sailed away towards the island in the middle of SCP-900, as giant roaring waves consumed the base and everyone on it. By the time that reinforcements arrived, there was nothing left. Though strangely, for the first ever time, technology seemed to work in the island's proximity. Long lens cameras pointed towards the island, showing multiple figures standing on the island's lone structure. Along with Kartika was Dr. Caroline Kip, along with the Foundation refugees who had sailed away to the island. Now they were all dressed in what appeared to be traditional island garb. It seemed that the island's only priestess wasn't alone anymore. Agent Kister was running for his life. Every breath had burned in his throat, like inhaling chlorine gas. He sped through the dark, surrounded by deafening metallic screams that bounced off the eternity of pipes scaling and strangling the walls around him. As far as he was concerned, this was what hell looked like. A nightmare boiler room that would somehow be less scary if Freddy Krueger was there, because at least there'd be some kind of recognizably human intelligence to reason with. The pipes, SCP-015, are truly unknowable. As an SCP Foundation Mobile Task Force member, Agent Kister had seen some truly horrific things in the line of duty. He'd been there during SCP-682 containment breaches, firing an assault rifle at the beast as its scales hardened into a bulletproof carapace. He'd seen the femur breaker used on some poor, godforsaken D-Class to lure Uncle Larry back into the containment chamber for some midnight fun. In the most anxiety-inducing mission of his life, he'd once even bagged 096's weeping face after it slaughtered a whole mountain village. And these damn pipes were going to be the thing that killed him. He turned a sharp corner, trying to block out the screams of his teammates. 4 of them had been sent in. The rest were already dead, or worse. Stupid, stupid, stupid. They'd made a classic military mistake, underestimating the capabilities of their enemy. And in Agent Kister's experience, this had always been a capital offense. All to install that machine, that stupid little remote control reconnaissance vehicle. That's what they'd given their lives for. Agent Kister tried to blink away the memory of Agent Montgomery's face. Monty was the youngest member of the team, 28 years old, his first major mission into the heart of a skip. Kister wanted to remember him how he'd first seen him, a bright-eyed greenhorn, ready to protect the human race from the horrors that lay in the dark. But he'd been the first to go when everything got FUBAR. It was the smaller pipes that got Monty. 4 of them shot out, spearing his lungs and heart, pinning him in place. Even if they tried to cut him out, he would have been a goner. He coughed up blood and went ghost white faster than you'd ever imagine. Kister would never forget, for what little time he had left to live, the horrible sight of the light leaving that kid's eyes. And all this because one of them had tripped on one of the pipes on the way out and busted it. The mission was already done. What an awful, pointless way to die. Kister was yanked from his aching thoughts by a sudden obstacle in the way, a huge, towering pipe that looked like a pillar of flesh, covered in bulbous, staring eyes. The thought crossed his mind. Jesus, these pipes can really be made out of anything. He looked down and saw a series of rubber pipes slithering towards his feet along the ground like snakes. It was time to run again, but how long could you even run for when the very location around you wants you dead? They should have sent the mole rats for a job like this. The infinitely reconfiguring pipes changed the layout of the warehouse around him, making escape seem all the more unfeasible. That's when he started thinking about the terrible thing that happened to Agent Green. When 015 turned hostile, they needed to make a run for it fast. It wasn't unlike being a pathogen inside a living body. You start to make trouble, and the body's immune system is going to come for you. And one of the most common mechanisms for a body fighting a virus is a fever, a sudden increase in temperature that burns out the threat. The group turned and ran as the pipes started twisting towards them. Agent Green panicked and began striking at the pipes around him with his hands. The first instinct would have been to shoot, but no guns were permitted inside the SCP-015 warehouse. It reacted severely to any kind of tool being brought into its proximity. Several dead agents and researchers could tell you all about this if they hadn't made that same mistake. But when things were already going sideways, it left them defenseless. Agent Green was soon boxed in, caged by a latticework of pipes in varying sizes. He tried desperately to push them out of the way and make an escape route, but the hissing noise was getting louder and louder as the pipes started to turn a glowing red all around him. After all, when a body needs to deal with a hostile foreign object, it burns out the threat. Kister wished he could shake the awful high-pitched wail that Agent Green made while the heat inside his pipe cage became unbearable. It was like seeing a human get caught inside a giant bug zapper. His skin went black and charred, and soon after, the heat had risen to such an insane degree that Agent Green was reduced to little more than ash in his pipe furnace. But Kister couldn't afford to dwell. He kept running, vaulting over a long, ragged pipe made from stinking human hair. This terrible place stank of motor oil, mold, and death. But maybe those perceptions had been colored by the terrible things he'd seen here. There it was again, that awful choked screaming coming from inside the pipes. Agent Boggs. It was a nightmare to hear him shriek like that. Boggs had been one of the toughest men that Kister had ever met. He mentored him, back when he first became an MTF member. Having Boggs on the team meant experience. It meant safety. It meant that things would go okay. Kister had seen Boggs stare down some of the most horrifying skips imaginable and not even flinch. And yet, here he was, screaming and bawling like a hurt child in the pipes. Boggs was the next one to get taken. As he and Kister ran through the dark, trying to find a way out, they'd passed a huge pipe made of a soft foam-like substance. A seam in the side of the pipe had yawned open, and a tangle of writhing tentacles, each one barbed with thorns like the stem of a rosebush. They enveloped Agent Boggs, cutting into his weathered skin. He gasped in pain, unable to scream. It happened so fast. Before Kister even had a chance to grab him, he was pulled into the pipe, and the crevice sealed behind him. And that was when the screaming really started for poor Agent Boggs. Kister hoped for his sake that he would die sometime soon. Shrouded in the fog of his dark thoughts, Agent Kister turned a corner and felt cold, hard metal suddenly collide with his face, breaking his nose with an unpleasant crunch. He'd been clotheslined by a low pipe that hadn't been there before, and now he was laid out on his back, face humming with pain. Thoughts and feelings swam. He looked up into the seemingly infinite web of pipes weaving through the air above him. He was right earlier. He just knew it. The place was hell. It'd be his eternal resting place. Suddenly, a new, huge shape moved into the space above him. A pipe of ancient, rusty iron that looked older than even the warehouse holding this whole mess. Right above him, there was a huge valve fixed into the pipe's belly. He watched helpless as the valve opened itself with a squeal, and a huge dark mass came pouring out of it onto his body. A sudden weight, a sudden warmth, sound and movement, and tiny scratching claws. Rats. Thousands of big, hungry black rats with gnarled yellow teeth, clumps of fur purged from their skin by mange, big ropey worm-like tails swaying and whipping at the air. Who knows how long they'd been in that pipe? Who knows when these rats had eaten anything that wasn't their brothers and sisters? And here was Agent Kister, given unto them by the glorious pipes. The last thing he ever saw were those nasty yellow teeth, because they ate his eyes first. Word of the four disappeared, and presumed dead operatives soon reached Dr. Charles Ogden Gears, the legendarily taciturn senior researcher that managed the SCP-015 project, among a myriad of others. His face didn't betray a flicker of emotion when he was informed about the men lost to SCP-015. It wasn't that he didn't feel for them, more that he deemed it both unproductive and unprofessional to dwell on the deaths of personnel when carrying out their duties. After all, being killed by an anomaly was simply an occupational hazard, and a generous stipend would be sent to their families to compensate for their tragic loss. Dr. Gears simply asked, "Was the mission successful in spite of the casualties? Did the team manage to install the modular robotic vehicle at the epicenter?" He was told that the MRV had been successfully installed at least. Dr. Gears nodded and began scheduling a second exploratory mission for a few months in the future to check the status of the machine. Still, in the meantime, the MRV would chug along, doing what humans couldn't, or perhaps shouldn't, do within the nightmarish mess of ever-growing pipes. It would roll through, collecting information on everything around it, hopefully giving the SCP Foundation an inroad to mapping the whole thing, without needing to send a cavalcade of staff into the danger zone, just to discover more about these peculiar pipes. Sure, some lives were lost getting in there, but this measure would likely save even more lives in the long run. That was until something went wrong. The exact nature of what happened to the MRV inside the domain of pipes was a mystery, but it wasn't doing its intended job, and the SCP Foundation needed to find out why. The second exploratory mission was required much sooner than they'd initially anticipated, with a dual purpose: collecting the readings and finding out what exactly had happened to the MRV in the first place. He included a more specific set of instructions for the next mission. Only 3 members of personnel to enter SCP-015 this time, to minimize potential loss. 1 trained technician to collect and read the diagnostics, and 2 guards to maintain discipline and safety under pressure. With a setup like that, what could possibly go wrong? Dr. Gears' various assistants began headhunting the perfect team for the job. Junior researcher Lon, wanting to prove herself and climb up the ranks, put her name forward. She was young, intelligent, and had the initiative to get the job done. Though there was one thing that she hadn't disclosed when she was applying for this important new position. Junior researcher Lon suffered from claustrophobia, the fear of enclosed spaces. Then the hunt was on for the 2 members of Foundation military personnel who'd escort Lon to the MRV to take the readings. Like the 2 priests in The Exorcist, they decided to recruit 1 grizzled, experienced operative and 1 extremely cautious young buck straight out of the Foundation MTF Training Academy. The younger of the 2 operatives, codenamed Agent 2, was careful and conscientious to a fault. He did things by the book, or not at all. The older operative, codenamed Agent 6, was quite the opposite. He'd done this job long enough to operate solely on instinct, and resented his employers for expecting him to approach his missions any other way. Lon, Agent 2, and Agent 6. The team was assembled, and when the time came, they were taken to SCP-015 to execute their mission. It should have been simple enough. Get in, collect the readings, and get back out. Though a few weeks earlier, the same thing would have been said for the mission to install the MRV, which left for Mobile Task Force operatives dead or worse. Nothing was ever as simple as it seemed when it came to SCP-015. They were only allowed flashlights inside. Anything else carried a substantial risk of activating SCP-015's defensive state, putting all of their lives in jeopardy. Lon had tried to keep things light, masking her own terrible fear at this strange new situation. She joked that perhaps the 3 of them should get Mario hats, seeing as they were plumbers now. Agent 2 happily laughed along, suggesting that perhaps he should be Luigi. Agent 6 was utterly unamused by this whole situation and wanted no part of it, which is honestly just so Wario of him. They followed along a carefully mapped route through the pipes, being careful not to touch any of them. After all, you never know what could set SCP-015 off. Agent 6 didn't share in their merriment or their concern. In fact, he had contempt for them and this whole situation. He thought Lon and Agent 2 were a pair of frightened, skittish children, willing to buy whatever Foundation-assigned bull honky they were given. He didn't believe that SCP-015 was anywhere near as dangerous as they'd been told. In all likelihood, knowing the eggheads up top, they just didn't want men of action like him breaking any of their precious little toys while conducting missions on their behalf. This whole thing was a big, stupid joke. As they ducked and weaved through the confines of SCP-015, the tensions between them all just silently grew. Their flashlights played among the pipes, revealing the insane variety of shapes, sizes, compositions, and materials in here. Wood, steel, flesh, bone, glass, pressed ash, granite, and so much more. And yet there were no pipes comprised of any standard pipe-making material, like lead, PVC plastic, or copper. It was undeniably freaky, but when you work with SCPs for long enough, he learned to stop asking questions about the more minor forms of strangeness inherent to anomalies. The composition only got narrower as they delved deeper into the warehouse. Lon felt the anxiety, like a hand gripping her throat and squeezing, but tried still to keep it hidden. Agent 6, the largest among them, almost got stuck a few times, trying to crawl into spaces too tight for him to fit. He felt like murdering Lon when she threw out a casual comparison to Winnie the Pooh in the process. When they reached the MRV, it gave them an ounce of momentary relief. The journey was halfway done. But the comfort was quickly squashed by seeing what had actually happened to the MRV. It had been speared by a pipe, and new pipes had grown through and out of it, effectively rooting it in place. This caused immediate debate among the group around one key issue. Did this mean that the MRV was now technically part of the pipes? And by extension, would the pipes feel the need to defend themselves if the databanks were removed from the MRV in order to deliver the readings back to the researchers at Site-17? While Lon and Agent 2 carefully discussed the issue, Agent 6 lost his temper and decided to show these two foolish kids how it was done. He claimed the two of them were worrying about a bunch of Foundation hooey that they were inexperienced and gullible enough to believe, as if this bunch of weird pipes was actually dangerous. It was like how every 6 anomalies, there's apparently one capable of ending the world. It's all a bunch of overblown, fear-mongering nonsense. And to prove that he wasn't just all talk on this front, Agent 6 pried open the top of the MRV and slid out the data cards, which seemed to be covered in some kind of viscous, unpleasant liquid from the pipes that had penetrated the device. Still, he'd gotten what they came for. He could have done this whole thing alone without this pair of bedwetters. He scoffed and said, "Kids, I don't know how you two survive." But he shouldn't have spoken so soon. The large pipe that he didn't even realize he was standing on opened up beneath his feet, and seconds later he was immersed up to his shoulders in it. 6 began to let out the most horrifying shrieks you've ever heard, and when Agent 2 and Lon ran over to try and help him out, they realized why. The pipe below Agent 6 was filled with flowing molten iron. By the time they pulled Agent 6 out, well, Agent 6 from the shoulders up, considering that that was all that was left, he was already dead. And despite the actual aggressor being destroyed, SCP-015 wasn't done. It was ready to clean house. As Agent 2 and Lon attempted to flee, some eye-level pipes around them burst, firing crystallized glass into their faces, cutting into their skin and eyes. But they needed to push on, despite the pain, if they wanted to survive and get out. The two of them ran, horrifying noises of twisting and bursting pipes roaring behind them. Pipes made of thorns and bones started to grow, blocking off their exits until they were trapped. Lon, utilizing her small frame, was able to crawl through a gap in the pipes into an adjoining chamber. 2 was given a horrifying surprise when a pipe burst near his hand, showering his flesh in thick, corrosive gunk. His hand melted away at the wrist. As Lon called for help in the tiny cramped chamber she was locked in, 2 ran off to try and find an exit where he could bring more people in to help them. But it would already be too late for poor Lon. A thick, honey-like substance began bleeding into the chamber, disgusting in its overpowering saccharine flavor and goopy, viscous thickness. The chamber seemed to get smaller and smaller as Lon screamed as the honey level rose. Eventually, it got higher than her mouth and nose could reach. She gave a horrifying final gurgle, and then she was gone, entombed forever between the pipes. Agent 2 kept running. His flashlight was beginning to die, but he didn't care. As his eyes bled from the splinters of glass and what was left of his hand dripped from the jagged nub of his wrist, all he could do was keep moving forwards. He panted and screamed and stumbled in the dark until he tripped on something he didn't notice and pitched forwards. He tumbled into the gaping maw of a nearby pipe, surrounded by unseeable, unknowable ooze, as he tumbled further down into the seemingly infinite darkness. It was too dark to see and too cramped to move anywhere but straight down. All he could do was scream and scream and scream, until his voice was hoarse and his throat bled, though nobody was there to even hear his cries. Days later, when his skin started to shred off, it was almost welcome. Dr. Gears would later receive the news of this tragically failed mission, and the 3 operatives now declared MIA because of it. He sighed and wrote up his report on the matter, closing with the sentence, "Data deemed non-vital in light of lost staff. SCP-015 classification level review suggested. Now, there's something out there, stalking, watching, lying in wait for the right moment. It can be anywhere, disappear in the blink of an eye, and reappear somewhere else, always poised and ready to strike. The SCP Foundation has it locked up for now. They keep a tracking tag fixed to it, so they can find it whenever it gets out. And believe us, it does get out. So when it does, you should watch your back, keep your wits about you, and check over your shoulder if you hear something move. If you aren't careful, it might come for you. If you let your guard slip, even for just a second, you could be next. McLean, Virginia. It's hardly a hotbed of anomalous activity, Viola thought to herself as she pulled up at an unassuming townhouse. When she first joined the SCP Foundation, Field Agent Smithy had imagined her life to be full of adventure, battling anomalous monsters and entities with the power to rewrite reality itself. Instead, she had unwittingly pulled a short straw somewhere along the way, and now got saddled with this, retrieving an anomaly that had gone missing. Viola had no idea what to expect. All she had been told was that according to its tracking tag, the anomaly had teleported into one of 3 potential relocation sites, or PRSs. She just happened to be the closest available field agent station nearby, and was instructed to drive over and collect it and return the escaped SCP to the Foundation. They had told Agent Smithy it was harmless, putting her guard right down as she stepped inside the house. She wasn't prepared for the ambush that awaited her. The house, codenamed PRS Townhouse, was silent, practically abandoned as she made her sweep. Room by room, Viola was methodically checking her corners, looking under beds, inside cupboards, behind couches, on top of shelves, making sure she'd covered every single inch of the house. Whatever this anomaly was, it was good at hiding. Before long, Agent Smithy had checked the whole house from top to bottom and had found nothing. No sight of the elusive SCP. With no idea where it was, Viola went into the kitchen. She figured she might as well see if there was anything to eat in this place. Maybe it had already gone, she thought. She'd have to check in with base and see if the tracking tag was still active at this location. This thing could teleport, after all. It could be sunbathing in Cancun by now, drinking a pina colada out of a coconut with a tiny umbrella. Oh, wouldn't that be the life? Viola approached the refrigerator and casually placed her hand on the door. With no idea what was waiting for her inside, she pulled it open and was immediately hit in the face with a pillow. It wasn't traveling at any substantial speed. In fact, it was like having been lightly thrown by a human hand more than anything else. It didn't knock Field Agent Smithy back or send her reeling, or have enough force to cause any injury. Instead, the pillow just softly impacted Viola's face, giving a little squeak, like a dog toy would before it lazily fell onto the kitchen floor. Fixed to one side of it was a post-it note with a crudely drawn face that glared up at her with a jagged frown. Viola sighed, mildly annoyed that she'd just had a pillow thrown at her now, after having spent half an hour searching the house. Leaning down, she picked it up and radioed the Foundation. She'd found SCP-3832. But it didn't end there. Oh no. After they got the anomaly safely back in its containment locker, it wasn't long before the Foundation was soon inundated with more pillowy pandemonium. Nobody was safe from being the next victim of a sudden ambush by SCP-3832. Not even a harmless, unassuming researcher like Dr. Franklin Prangley. He had just been going about his day, checking containment procedures were all in place, running a few tests on a few SCPs. The usual stuff for a scientist working at Site-64. That's when the call went out over the comm system. It had happened again. SCP-3832 had vanished from the locker it was usually kept secure in. While on the outside, it looked like little more than an ordinary cushion, this anomaly was the ultimate hunter, displaying behavior almost exactly like that of various highly evolved ambush predators in the wild. And now this hunter was loose again, and it was open season on the Foundation staff. This time it hadn't gone far, having only teleported to a different part of Site-64. As he would soon discover, the cunning cushion was hiding just above Dr. Prangley's locker, waiting for the researcher to return to his office. Then, when he was close enough, SCP-3832 would strike. But the next would-be victim of the predatory pillow had an advantage. The location tracking tag that the Foundation had affixed to the pillow proved to be its downfall, giving Prangley an approximate fix on its whereabouts. Gently pushing his office door open, he instantly spotted it on top of his office locker, ready to pounce on him the moment he got close enough. Slowly and methodically, Dr. Prangley edged around his office, reaching for a meter stick he kept by his desk. With his chosen weapon in hand, the Foundation researcher stepped closer to his locker, eyes fixed on SCP-3832. He was brandishing the wooden meter stick in both hands, carrying it like an early caveman with a handcrafted spear. At that moment, Dr. Franklin Prangley was locked in the dichotomy between predator and prey, that age-old dance, a battle that had raged for almost all of time itself. Man versus pillow. We've all been there, haven't we? Suddenly striking first, Franklin took a sharp swipe at SCP-3832 with his meter stick. He broke out with a smile of glee as the pillow was toppled from its vantage point. It no longer had the high ground over him. Employing a swift offense as the best defense, the noble Dr. Prangley had felled SCP-3832 in one quick, preemptive strike. Or so he thought. As the old saying goes, pride goeth before the fall. Not sooner had it landed in a heap on the office floor than SCP-3832 launched itself back up and limply hit Franklin square in the stomach. He let out a low grunt as the pillow connected with his lower abdomen and squeaked again, announcing to the world that SCP-3832 had just claimed its latest victim. Dr. Prangley might never get over that particular humiliation. If he's eaten by SCP-682 in a week, it will be a merciful reprieve. No one could end this crafty cushion's reign of terror. To stand against this goose feather-filled hunter was to risk certain death. Well, death by embarrassment, at least, which some would argue is honestly worse. Security Officer Jennifer Blair was never the same after it happened to her. It was waiting for her behind the coffee machine in the Site-64 break room. She'd gone in there for a quick cup, just to recharge her energy levels with a boost of caffeine, before getting back to her post guarding the containment level. Poor Jen, she never saw it coming. SCP-3832 leaped from its latest hiding place, striking Officer Blair right in her unprotected ankle. The sudden vicious attack from the polyester cover-wielding persecutor caught her completely unguarded, which was somewhat ironic for a member of the Foundation's security personnel. But Security Officer Jennifer Blake had no time to laugh at the irony there. Punctuated by that same squeaking sound, the sudden impact of the pillow colliding with her ankle caused her to stumble. Not fall, mind you. She only lost balance on one leg and was able to quickly steady herself immediately after. But it was enough, just enough, for her coffee to spill. If you need a moment to compose yourself after that horrifying revelation, we'd understand. It's one of the more disturbing things we've shared on this normally family-friendly channel. Leave a comment with a key phrase #JusticeForJen so this poor SCP Foundation security officer knows she's in your thoughts and prayers after this harrowing incident. Everyone okay now? Okay, good. Back to the story at hand. The incident caused Jen to suffer a few minor first-degree burns on her hand and wrist, requiring a 15-minute treatment in the Site-64 infirmary, which the medic described as the worst relatively minor burns I've ever seen. While her external injuries might not have taken much time to heal, now Officer Blake had to bring instant coffee from home to work in a thermos flask. Can you imagine such horror? It stretches the human imagination to even compensate for the level of terror it inspires in our hearts and souls. Everywhere you looked, Site-64 staff were being struck down left, right, and center. Mildly inconvenienced without warning by non-lethal and mostly harmless ambushes from SCP-3832. During another relocation incident, the predatory pillow teleported itself back to the location known as PRS Townhouse in McLean, Virginia. Once again, Field Agent Viola Smithy was dispatched to the scene to retrieve the elusive pillow. Only this time, she had learned from her last encounter. She brought backup. Specifically, one other field officer, named Gordon Gompton, to hopefully give the cunning cushion its critical comeuppance. Both field agents knew one of them would have to take the hit, and Gordon stepped up to the task. After all, it had already got Viola once before. It was his turn to face the nightmare that was SCP-3832 head-on. They entered the townhouse, Agent Gompton taking the lead, acting as a human shield against any oncoming pillowy projectiles. Just as they expected, and as it had before, the ambush took place not long after, with SCP-3832 ineffectively hurling itself from its hiding place. But at the last possible second, Gordon ducked out of the way. It was purely instinctive, but it left Viola at the mercy of the oncoming cushion. It was a betrayal of truly Shakespearean proportions, playing out in real time. Marginally vexed at being hit a second time with the pillow, Agent Smithy immediately decided to claim her well-earned revenge. Grabbing the nearest safe object, which happened to be SCP-3832 itself, she hurled it directly at her fellow field operative. It collided with his head with another squeak, the combined sight and sound causing Viola to burst out laughing. Wearing a crafty smirk, Gordon grabbed the pillow and threw it back at her, the same thing happening. The pair of them kept at it, repeatedly throwing SCP-3832 at each other again and again. Every time the same squeaking filled the air, followed by more laughing from the two agents. As they continued their pillowy fight, SCP-3832 underwent a change that nobody at the SCP Foundation had ever witnessed before. With every throw, hitting either Agent Smithy or Agent Gompton with its characteristic squeaking noise, the face drawn on the post-it note that was permanently stuck to SCP-3832 began to change. Usually the sticky paper depicted a jagged hand-drawn frowny face, an upturned mouth and eyebrows pointing inward in attack formation. A truly terrifying countenance to behold. It also turned out that it was impossible to remove the post-it note without causing the pillow to teleport again. However, when it was being thrown about, used in a pillow fight between two Foundation field agents, joining in a rare moment of childlike joy, the face of SCP-3832 began to change. The frown was replaced with the unmistakable curvature of a smile, those angry attack eyebrows completely vanishing as the pillow was pleasantly pelted from Agent Viola Smithy to Agent Gordon Gompton. Eventually, after they'd had their fun, the two operatives were duty-bound to return the now grinning cushion to the Foundation. They reported their findings to researchers, many of whom seemed eager to take part in tests replicating this incident, either because they were looking to blow off some steam with a nice wholesome pillow fight, or because they wanted to make SCP-3832 smile again. It didn't take long for the fearsome piece of feathered-filled furniture to get back to its old tricks, though. After all, you can't teach an old pillow new tricks. And as for its next unsuspecting victim, the next would be none other than Director of Site-64 himself, one Edgar Hallman. That's right. Not even one of the highest-ranked members of Foundation staff stationed at that particular facility was exempt from falling prey to the dreaded pillow. Having once again disappeared from the confines of its locker, SCP-3832 subsequently concealed itself under the desk in Director Holman's office, laying in wait to pounce at its prey. As he pulled up his chair to sit down, the site director was met with a soft, cushiony impact to his shins. Any further up and it could have caused serious damage. He was lucky that dastardly pillow didn't crease his well-ironed slacks. Then there was the relocation event that became known as Incident 3832-NR1. A few key differences set this particular occurrence apart from the others on SCP-3832's calamitous cacophony of concealed cushion carnage. Say that 5 times fast. For one, it is what directly led to the first of a few rare instances of where the post-it-faced pillow teleported itself to a location now known as PRS Truffle, the designation given to St. John's Chocolate Factory in Portland, Oregon. Why a saint had a chocolate factory, we may never know, but I digress. Since becoming a potential relocation site that SCP-3832 is able to teleport itself to, the factory had to be seized by the SCP Foundation, where it had once offered tours to the public to present them with all the wonders of the sweet tooth process of making chocolate. The gates now remained closed, with the false promises that St. John's Chocolate Factory was under new management, keeping people out. Entire floors that could easily be accessed by someone trying to swipe a sample or two have now been completely cleared out by the Foundation, with not a stick of furniture left in the place for anyone to steal, or for SCP-3832 to hide behind. On the 14th of February, St. Valentine's Day 2017, Foundation technicians had been working on repairing a glitch that had been disrupting SCP-3832's tracking tag. It was during that moment that the wily polyester pillow teleported out of its locker at Site-64 once again, vanishing and reappearing in the trunk of a car belonging to a member of personnel. Now, for security reasons, the name of the staff member has been censored, letting her retain her anonymity, and probably whatever is left of her dignity too. We'll just call her Big Sister, which is how the file on the highly classified SCP archive refers to her. Up until this point, the researchers at the SCP Foundation have never known SCP-3832 to have the ability to teleport itself into a moving vehicle. Teleportation is hard enough at the best of times. Seriously, you try shifting every atom of your body from one spot to another without getting stuck in a wall. And yet, the crafty cushion made the switch effortlessly, relocating itself into the back of Big Sister's car without her noticing. And to her credit, she had other things on her mind. She just finished a long day's work at Site-64, and she needed to pick something up for a special someone. It was Valentine's Day after all. As she drove away, Big Sister was completely oblivious to the fact that SCP-3832 could apparently now teleport itself into moving vehicles. The research team studying the pillow and even the security staff she passed at the front gate were equally unaware. Making her way further and further from Site-64, Big Sister pulled onto the freeway, nervously checking her watch. She desperately hoped she could get there in time before the factory closed, and that they'd still have a box left. They had to, right? Who sells out of chocolate on Valentine's Day? It's their biggest sales day of the year, save for perhaps Easter Sunday. Getting closer to St. John's Chocolate Factory, Big Sister could see from a distance that the lights were still on. She relaxed in the driver's seat, breathing a sigh of relief that she'd made it in good time. Her thoughts quickly turned to her sweetheart, imagining the look of delight on their face when she got home and presented them with a shiny, heart-shaped box, filled with a delicious assortment of confectionaries. Parking up, she dashed inside, the last person in before closing time. Little did she know what was still lurking in the trunk of her car, like the urban legend of the axe-wielding killer in the back seat. With her romantic holiday gesture of a box of chocolates all paid for and tucked securely under her arm, Big Sister made her way back to the car. Then, a thought struck her, a terrible thought. She couldn't just leave this in the car. The surprise would be totally ruined if her significant other could see what she'd got for them. There was only one thing for it. The box of chocolates needed to be hidden when she got home. And where else do you think to hide something in a car? In the trunk, of course. As Big Sister unlocked the back and lifted up the trunk lid, a concealed cushion stealth attack of pure pillow force struck her. SCP-3832 launched itself from its hiding place, only to collide with the box that Big Sis was carrying, catching her completely by surprise. Making its signature squeak, the predatory pillow knocked the box sharply upwards into the air and, in a cruel twist of fate, sent the pointed edge of the heart straight into Big Sister's face. The tapered tip was propelled straight into her mouth, chipping her front tooth, as SCP-3832 landed on the ground of the parking lot. It was the most brutally violent attack that SCP-3832 had ever conducted, shocking everyone at the SCP Foundation with its sheer wanton ferocity. Making a call to the SCP Foundation, Big Sister requested a recovery team to come and collect the troublesome cushion, after picking up the present for her Valentine and the fragment of her tooth that it had rather unceremoniously knocked out. Sighing, she leaned against the rear bumper of her car, keeping an eye on SCP-3832 while she waited for the recovery team to arrive. What a way to spend Valentine's Day, Big Sister thought to herself, worried about what her partner would say when she got home late with a chipped tooth. Then she noticed something that, while it didn't fix the situation, at least made her feel a little less bad about it. The post-it note face of SCP-3832 had changed once again. Big Sister grabbed her phone from her pocket to take a picture of it, so she could hand it over as evidence to the research team. Instead of its normal frown scribbled across the sticky note, SCP-3832's hand-drawn expression had become an almost bashful, dimpled smile, with a big pair of cartoon hearts in its eyes. So if you take anything away from this video, it should be this gentle reminder. The chances of you being ambushed and pounced upon by a pillow with a post-it note for a face are, well, statistically speaking, the chances are pretty slim, but they're never zero either. You really should keep your wits about you. Stay alert. Make sure you check for movement when you leave every room, and look under tables and even in your refrigerator just to be safe. And if you see something moving out of the corner of your eye, even just for a split second, then you too might just get hit in the face by a pillow. The monster gave a deep guttural roar as it came to life inside the iron cage. It was a reptilian abomination, immense and violent. Its huge torso tapered off into 7 long, coiling necks with snarling, snapping heads on the end, covered in a thick carapace of red scales. On the other end, thorny tails whipped. It was the Dragon of Revelation, the incarnation of Satan itself, and the harbinger of the end of the world. And then, with another terrible booming roar, the monster collapsed in the cage, shook with full-body tremors, and died where it lay. Its heart, circulatory system, and lungs weren't developed enough to keep a creature of the dragon's size alive, and with 7 different heads, its nervous system had no idea which one to receive commands from. It was effectively doomed as soon as it had come to be. The experiment had been a failure. Nearby, 2 austere nurses flanked a very special little girl. She was a small, slumped figure with pale skin and bright pink hair, a color she'd chosen herself. Her eyes had a haunted, witchy look to them, heterochromic, with black sclera. Her left eye, the only eye she could actually see through, had a green iris. The other was a dull yellow. Blood trickled from her nostrils, dripping down her top lip. The nurses sighed and picked the exhausted girl up. They carried her off into the bunks where the 15 other children were resting. This was how the days often went at Keys to the Kingdom Christian Charter School for Gifted Youth, deep in the mountains of Colorado, far from the prying eyes of the authorities. If you were to believe the prophecies of the person who created this place, then this building would be ground zero for the end of the world. The young girl was laid into her bunk by the nurses. She needed to rest and recover. Creating monsters always took it out of her like this. Her abilities were why she was here, why her mother and father had given her up. Even when she was a baby, she had an unnatural affinity for animals, and any that came near her would inevitably be changed. It was her curse, her gift. She was evolution's child, and one day she would fulfill what the nurses told her was her ultimate purpose. Of course, the other children had their own gifts too. One would see the future. Another could look into the minds of others and see the world through their eyes. Another could turn the trace metals in her blood into solid objects. Some the girl hadn't spoken to enough to even know what they were capable of. She just knew that more than any of the others, the man who ran this place seemed to take a special interest in her. The door opened in the middle of the night when all the others had fallen asleep. A tall figure marched into the room. He held himself with a disciplined military bearing, his back rigid and his shoulders broad. It was Mr. Green, the overseer of the Keys to the Kingdom Christian Charter School for Gifted Youth. Rarely seen, but always known. "What went wrong today, child?" he asked. The girl tried to make excuses. She needed more time. They needed to do more work to understand the organs of the dragon before she could make it real. Otherwise, it'd just keep dying like it had done today. "I've been generous keeping you here, child," he said. "But you've been testing the limits of my hospitality. You failed to bring about the plague." She always had trouble with microorganisms. Mr. Green had wanted her to help him engineer a virus, a great plague that could spread across the world and cleanse it of the filth that had choked it, to destroy the human race and allow the good to ascend to heaven while the wicked burned in hell. But no matter how many textbooks on virology Mr. Green and the nurses had read to her, it didn't make her any more able to manipulate life that small. "And now," Mr. Green continued, "you failed in the incarnation of the dragon. If you can't even create the dragon, how do you expect us to raise the beast of the earth and the beast of the sea? We'll never be able to purge this sinful earth at this rate." She tried to make her excuses, but he didn't seem to hear any of them. Mr. Green wanted results. and she would be expected to deliver them one way or another. He would make her raise the dragon, one of the heralds of the apocalypse in the biblical book of Revelation, even if it destroyed her. Thankfully, it didn't come to that, because another organization was on the way, one that Mr. Green was actually more than familiar with. It all happened incredibly fast. Foundation Mobile Task Force operatives performed a daring sneak attack on the compound, where they engaged in a firefight with the nurses, who shouldered AK-47s and attempted to take down the attackers who were trying to ruin their beautiful apocalyptic plans. However, the superior training and equipment of the MTF operatives allowed them to easily rout the nurses and neutralize them, mainly non-lethally. Mr. Green, on the other hand, had no intention of going alive, which was lucky, because the Foundation had very little interest in taking him alive either. He was filled with lead during a firefight with the invaders, bringing his reign of terror to an end. This mysterious zealot, going by Henry Green as his latest alias, was an ex-member of the CIA who'd worked with the SCP Foundation on a number of collaborative projects in the past, including Project Black Book, Project Smilodon, and Operation Stargate. Clearly, the revelations of the true horrors out there had broken Green's mind, and he'd used the knowledge he'd gained from his time working with the Foundation to hatch an apocalyptic plan, finding and selecting gifted children in order to use their power for his own gain, and to fulfill his delusion that it was his destiny to bring about the apocalypse. It had been a fitting outcome that the only apocalypse he'd truly brought about was his own. The nurses were given amnestics and returned to their daily lives, given that they'd seemingly all been caught in Green's delusions too. The custody of the children was passed over to the SCP Foundation. Most significantly, the little girl who Green had believed was destined to create his terrible dragon and allow him to bring back the end. In her new life, she was given a new designation, SCP-040. The Foundation may appear brutal in its methods, but it maintains a consistent position. It is cold, not cruel. That coldness is what enables difficult decisions, preserving the many even when it requires sacrificing the few. But the interesting and honestly delightful twist here is that the Foundation is actually neither cold nor cruel when it comes to dealing with SCP-040. And this is largely thanks to the work of Dr. Kane Pathos Crow. Crow, by the way, is the only high-ranking researcher at the SCP Foundation who also happens to be a Golden Labrador. Don't question it, if anyone would be able to show sympathy to SCP-040, it would be the professional researcher who has to fight back the compulsion to chase squirrels and birds. And Professor Crow did indeed show sympathy for this anomaly. That's in stark contrast to the far more militant Dr. Clef, who wanted to pursue the course of exterminating her before she could grow up and become more powerful. Luckily for SCP-040, who prefers to be called 40, Crow won the war of words on this one. And because of this, she's been allowed to live in far more comfortable and humane existence within the confines of containment than many other anomalies in the Foundation's roster. She's given supervised access to the site library, recreational facilities, cafeteria, and public areas, given that she's shown excellent control over her power and no desire to disobey the commands of her Foundation handlers. Because she also shows above-average intelligence, she's also enrolled in an on-site youth education program headed by Dr. Logan. Dr. Abernathy, as an expert in child psychology, also heads 40's monthly psychological evaluation to make sure that containment isn't taking too much of a toll on her. While to people like Dr. Clef it might seem like the Foundation has gone soft here, but when you approach the problem logically, it makes total pragmatic sense. If she were to follow the trend of some other humanoid anomalies, it's possible that 40's power will only increase as she gets older. 40 would pose no risk to the Foundation if she were dead, as Dr. Clef has proposed, but alive and loyal, with exponentially increasing power, she could become one of the most valuable tools in the Foundation's arsenal. Some researchers even theorize that her incredible penchant for biological manipulation could allow her to raise the dead, but more on that later. One of the other unique allowances that the Foundation has allowed 40 is keeping some of her biological creations as pets inside her containment chamber, and these entities are extremely strange and fascinating in and of themselves. There's SCP-040-1A,
which doesn't superficially resemble any extant entity in the animal kingdom. It's a symbiotic polymorphic creature, similar in physical structure to a coat or sweater, which 40 is able to wear in exchange for it feeding on a small quantity of her blood, not unlike a leech. When the Foundation performed a genetic test on this creature, they discovered it was genetically closest to the modern house cat. Perhaps it had been a non-anomalous cat once, before 40 decided she wanted a closer relationship to the creature. Then there's the equally weird SCP-040-1C, which can't function as an item of clothing, but makes up for it by being able to fly. Just not how you would probably expect. It's a spherical creature, somewhat like an underwater pufferfish, which contains a series of bladders that could fill with a helium-like gas in order to enable flight. But it can't just fly. It's also incredibly musically talented. It has 11 limbs, each one ending with opposable digits, and a respiratory system that could create a larger number of different musical tones. It's like someone playing their phone out loud on the bus, but it can fly too. And of course, there's the irreplaceable SCP-040-1J, a large pink furry quadruped with no eyes and a large mouth with blunt teeth. Why does a creature like this exist? It's actually a bizarre steed for 40, who likes to ride it around like a horse. While senior researchers on 40's case were still optimistic that her powers would grow over time, there was also an undeniable feeling of frustration around the current limitations that stymied her. Just as Henry Green had once found, it wasn't as easy as dreaming a creation into existence. 40 needed to spend tremendous time and effort working on each piece of biological manipulation. This often results in headaches and nosebleeds. 40 also needs to create creatures that have logical biological mechanisms for functioning and surviving. She couldn't create a creature without a logical knowledge of the creature's potential inner workings. For example, you couldn't just give a creature wings and expect it to fly. It would need to also have hollow bones, like a bird, along with a more aerodynamic body. It's another reason why the Foundation has invested so heavily in 40's education. The more knowledgeable she becomes about physics and biology, the more she'll be able to get out of her abilities. It's all part of the Foundation's long game for harnessing 40's potential. And as we mentioned earlier, part of that long game was seeing if 40's biological mastery could be used to raise the dead. So they decided to cut to the chase and try just that. One day after her classes, the young girl was taken into the containment site's morgue. She felt uneasy when she saw the corpse laying on the slab, and felt even more uneasy when a researcher brought in a cage with 3 live lab rats. She was given a single instruction: see if she could take, for lack of a better word, the life force of the 3 rats and infuse them into the corpse. She was reluctant at first, until her handlers made it clear that she wasn't being given an option here. Surrounded by expectant researchers, she began her work. The rats were released onto the corpse, and 40 used her powers to essentially absorb the rats into the corpse, fusing 2 of them and manipulating the vital essences of the rats into the corpse's vital systems. To the shock and amazement of everyone in attendance, it seemed to actually work, and the corpse sat bolt upright on the table, frantically breathing. But all was not as it seemed. 40 collapsed in a state of extreme distress, suffering from migraines and a severe nosebleed. When the Foundation attempted to interview the revived corpse, who had once been a mobile task force operative, they found that he had no memory of his prior life. In fact, it seemed to have been a completely different personality with the intelligence of a human toddler. He has been kept in permanent care since, and upon being interviewed by Dr. Abernathy, 40 reported that the whole experience deeply distressed her. It seems that Evolution's child has ways to go before she can fulfill the SCP Foundation's most ambitious expectations. Perhaps someday she will become the tool they want her to be. The question is, with some of their more severe methods, will they be able to keep her loyalty by the time they get there? Or will their methods of education have turned her into one of their most powerful new enemies?
It's a natural instinct in many species to protect their young, and sometimes it's not just their own babies, but any young that look like them. Regardless of your personal feelings on humans' earliest stage, it is a scientific fact that human babies are designed to emphasize their own adorable helplessness to make sure that other older humans take care of them. A baby's cry is an inherently distressing sound, And when we hear it, some deep primal part of us feels the urge to comfort and care for the child until the sound stops. But of course, we're talking about the world of the SCP Foundation here, where there are bunnies that can eat anything, teddy bears that might steal your organs to make duplicates of themselves, and chocolate fountains filled with trillions of murderous insects. Nothing is what it seems here, and even the most innocent and cute creatures may be hiding a deadly secret, SCP-734 being no exception. Today we're talking about the baby. This anomaly proves that dangerous things can come in small packages, but where others only saw misery and death, the SCP Foundation saw a certain potential. Our story begins in the maternity ward of a hospital in the USA, where every medical professional's worst nightmare was unfolding. An unknown but incredibly fast-acting, flesh-eating pathogen seemed to be running rampant across the hospital's population. It began when patients who weren't even admitted for dermatological issues started complaining of severe itches and extreme skin pain. Some nurses and doctors in the maternity ward began to experience similar symptoms, as well as one of the infants, leading to a massive quarantine effort. While the initial symptoms first appeared to be limited to severe pain and discomfort on isolated parts of the skin, the condition of the afflicted soon escalated. Their skin began to messily flake off as the cells comprising it lost physical cohesion and died. It was a kind of strange, anomalous rot that seemed to work inwards, first destroying the integrity of the outer layer of skin, and then cause further disintegration to deeper parts of the body. Once the skin had shut off, the pathogen would turn its attention to what was lying beneath. Against all odds, the disease affected organs, muscle tissue, the vascular system, and even bones. Nothing was spared. The victims' bodies would completely break down, and they would be dead within a few hours. By the time the pathogen had finished ravaging its victims, what was left didn't even look human anymore. Not only patients, but doctors and nurses that had been walking the wards mere hours before were now little more than piles of human tissue sitting in what had previously been their hospital beds. Whatever this was, it seemed like the fastest progressing infection in recorded history. Hospital staff and administrators were terrified. This appeared to be an entirely new disease, with a mysterious form of transmission and, worst of all, no cure. They were even more confused when several black vans pulled up outside the hospital, and mysterious men in hazmat suits spilled out and began setting up a quarantine zone around the entire building. Whoever these strange people were, they definitely weren't the CDC. Little did the hospital personnel know that this was the group you'd never want showing up and putting your location on lockdown. It was the SCP Foundation. The infected remains of the victims were taken away for research purposes, and the Foundation operatives immediately began conducting debriefing interviews with witnesses. They soon determined from a mix of eyewitness accounts and hospital surveillance footage that everyone infected with the mysterious pathogen had all been in a particular section of the maternity ward earlier in the day. And when the operatives investigated this area, they found another strange detail. An infant had no registered mother present in the hospital. The Foundation would later learn that this was likely because the baby's mother was the first victim of the deadly disease. After eliminating all other possible options, it seemed that the only anomalous element that could have caused all of this was the mysterious baby. Though just how the mother even survived carrying the baby to term was a mystery in and of itself. The baby was a Caucasian male human infant between 7 and 8 months of age. Nothing appeared outwardly anomalous about the child, but they could confirm that every single victim of the anomalous pathogen had come into physical contact with the child earlier that day. Everyone who had been at the hospital was given amnestic treatment, and the Foundation constructed plausible cover stories for the deaths that had occurred that day. Like so many others before it, the child was secured and spirited away to the nearest applicable Foundation containment site. There it was reclassified SCP-734, and finally the real testing into what precisely this infant was capable of could begin. Physiologically, SCP-734 appeared mostly non-anomalous. The infant had above-average intelligence and physical aptitude for a child his age,
but otherwise showed no mutations or abnormalities that would suggest a divergence from typical human biology. Despite a vast array of tests performed by the Foundation into essentially every aspect of 734's biology, they couldn't find anything that hinted at the origin of the mysterious pathogen. But through some trial and extremely costly error, the Foundation was able to learn more about how exactly the pathogen worked. The only vector for transmission seemed to be direct contact with the baby itself, up to and including the fluids and residues it leaves behind. Those affected cannot transmit the anomalous flaking effect to others, meaning the risk of an epidemic is relievingly minimal. But of course, accidents still happen, as was discovered when one agent misplaced her sympathy for the baby and decided to remove her mask while interacting with him. Her logic was that her masked face might have caused the baby some kind of distress, and as long as she was only coming into contact with him via her own gloved hands, everything would be fine. But some dust particles were floating in the air at the time, and SCP-734 sneezed in her face. The agent began screaming in pain and recoiling from the baby, but it was already too late. Her fate was sealed. She was taken to the infirmary and given sedatives so that she could hopefully die in as little pain as possible. In roughly 72% of cases, amputation of the affected areas has prevented the entire body from succumbing to the anomalous effects of SCP-734. But this isn't exactly feasible, where the point of contact is the victim's head. Within hours, the agent's flesh had flaked off her face, leaving her looking like a red, bloody skull. A few hours after that, she didn't have a head at all. Throughout the disintegration process of this unfortunate agent, the Foundation took grisly photographs. These photographs are shown to anyone preparing to work on the SCP-734 research project, to teach them a hard lesson on the importance of adhering to proper safety protocols. And these protocols about how to deal with the baby are incredibly tight, given that even incidental contact is often a death sentence. Anyone entering the baby's containment chamber needs to wear contained atmosphere hazmat suits. Anyone who makes physical contact with the baby, even when suited up, is immediately removed from the area and subject to several hours of quarantine and observation. Even inanimate objects that have been inside the containment chamber need to be thoroughly sterilized before being removed. Given that even anomalous children like SCP-734 have very delicate needs, a handler is always standing by in full hazmat gear to take care of the baby. These handlers are rotated every hour to maintain alertness and safety. These handlers feed and change SCP-734 regularly, and sometimes even provide toys that have been approved by the O5 Council. The Foundation has gone to great lengths to keep SCP-734 alive and comfortable, because they believe that SCP-734 could be an important asset for them in the future. Or more specifically, they see great strategic value in SCP-734's blood. As mentioned earlier, contact with any matter from SCP-734 triggers its deadly anomalous effects, including bodily fluids like blood. But unlike many toxic pathogens, in this case, there is no risk of the infection getting out of control, since the infected do not become vectors for transmission. Because of this, the blood of SCP-734 can act as a powerful weapon for both terminating anomalies deemed unviable by the O5 Council and assassinating dangerous people who belong to rival groups. Contact with the blood would completely destroy the target's body, with no other anomalous effects and no evidence of who exactly conducted the hit. SCP-734 has been fitted with an arterial catheter so that the Foundation can collect large quantities of blood from the anomalous infant every single week for storage and research. But it isn't just the blood that the Foundation sees potential in. SCP-734 himself has scored incredibly well on the Esslinger Loyalty Index, the test the Foundation uses to judge the loyalty of potential applicants to the Foundation cause. As SCP-734 matures, if these scores remain consistent, he will likely be trained to become a Foundation field agent in the future. An agent capable of killing someone with a touch would, needless to say, be an asset to certain covert missions that the Foundation would probably prefer to keep off the books. Of course, the SCP Foundation recruiting certain compliant anomalies to perform missions for them is far from unprecedented. The most infamous of these is SCP-076, also known as Able. a supernatural, eternally resurrecting swordsman, and perhaps one of the finest warriors who ever lived. The Foundation took note of this and channeled his eternal thirst for battle into working with his very own mobile task force. He could assist in missions by taking out his bloodlust on enemy groups of interest and dangerous anomalies. However, this ended up working a little too well and led to disaster. Abel was so good at his job that he burned through all of his allotted missions at astonishing speed. Left with nothing more to do, Abel got antsy, which led him to turning his murderous desires on his fellow team members, and then the Foundation as a whole. It was an all-out massacre before his colleagues were finally able to kill him and return him to containment. The failure of this initiative gave the very idea of letting anomalies work for the Foundation in the field a bad name. But since then, things have changed, especially with the establishment of MTF Alpha 9, aka Last Hope, a new mobile task force formed entirely of anomalous individuals and their handlers. These consist of somewhat more stable anomalies, such as Abel's counterpart SCP-073, also known as Cain. Cain cannot be harmed, with any harm befalling him simply being mirrored back on his attacker, and his vast array of knowledge makes him an incredibly useful, intelligent asset. Another of the several members of Last Hope is Iris, also known as SCP-105. Much like Cain, Iris not only has anomalous powers that make her immensely valuable for missions in the field, she's also compliant and capable of listening to reason, unlike Cain. Her abilities include being able to actively surveil and even interact with photos of any location, especially when taken with her anomalous camera. Someday, SCP-734 could count himself among other anomalous Foundation agents like these, providing he continues to show promise and doesn't develop a dislike of the Foundation as he ages, since after all, he won't be a baby forever. So if you ever find yourself on the Foundation's bad side, you have a good reason to be paranoid. You'll have no idea that one day, the man who's going to kill you will approach and shake your hand with a smile. It won't be until later, when you feel that strange tingle on your palm and feel the skin starting to flake away, that you'll realize you've been a dead man walking for hours. The Church of the Broken God worships the holiness of machinery and the god Mechane, who rules over all things. What would you do if society as we know it crumbled, humanity fell from grace, and the Church took over the world at large? Would you make your way to the Clockwork orthodoxy to upgrade your fragile meat body with some pristine machinery? What sort of changes would you make? How are you going to adapt to the new world order? We posed this question to the amazing fans of SCP Explained, and you told us all about all the ways you would upgrade your fragile human bodies to adjust to the new world. So let's get right to it, and see who would rise to the challenge and please the mighty Mechane, and who would perish as a useless flesh bag. Sean Michelson said, "I would replace my left arm with nerve damage from when I broke it as a kid, and the bionic replacement would be capable of morphing into any shape necessary for the task at hand. Lockpick, axe, sword, etc. We're off to a great start here, Sean. You turning your left arm into the world's coolest Swiss Army knife sounds like a heck of an upgrade. Now that you've accepted Mechane into your heart, you'll never have to go to the hardware store again. Quick question though, what are you planning on using that lockpick for? If you're planning a heist, make sure you do it safely, and see if you can transform that arm into a sweet getaway car." Pyronod682 said, "I always took pride in my size. If I got enhancements at all, I'd get some that would either make me a proper Goliath or a tall, gaunt, but sturdy frame. Either way, my presence would be enough to intimidate. So, how tall are we talking here? Slenderman tall? Empire State Building tall? Either way, it's admirable that in a world where you can be any cybernetically enhanced thing you want, you're choosing to just be big and scary. Hey, if it's good enough for Mechagodzilla, it's good enough for us." Ivan Pekinin said, "The most fragile and exposed part of our body are probably the eyes. A prototype might be a new model of artificial eyes that can provide an omnidirectional sight. Being of metal, they don't need to be hydrated, making the person with them having a constant view of the surroundings. It might also allow blind people to be able to see again. That is an excellent idea. You'll put the eye drop companies out of business for good, not to mention how the global glasses economy would crash, but that's a small price to pay for giving supervision to anyone who wants it."
Maybe you'll even be able to see why kids love the taste of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Kaiser Affini said, I would seek the most advanced upgrade I can think of, one that allowed me to create a research center inside a black hole, allowing the movement of myself and anything else I designate to and from it. Distance and time are unacceptable hindrances in the project of optimizing the Omniverse. Euclidean physics only limit advanced inventions as well. We must evolve past such limitations. Well, now you're thinking outside of the box. Outside of all Euclidean shapes, really. Not entirely sure what kind of upgrade would let you set up shop inside a black hole, but there's nothing wrong with shooting for the stars. Or a gravitational pull strong enough to absorb the stars and snuff out their light, leaving only darkness behind. Joss Moore said, I would attempt to integrate SCP-900 into my own body, providing limitless sustenance and a very effective weapon if used creatively. Why upgrade your body so that it no longer needs food and water when you can just stick a coffee machine in your chest and have endless mochachinos? That's a life of luxury. Plus, SCP-900 can produce non-potable liquids such as sulfuric acid and even liquid nitrogen for when you really need someone to chill. It's got everything you need, and now it's part of your body. It might be a little clunky carrying around a vending machine everywhere, but who needs to fit through doors when you can have all the banana smoothies you could ever want? Mason Skorup said, the skin would be interesting. I'm imagining a sleek human form, a much more aesthetically awesome kind of shield. Flexible and durable, much more resilient. Body temperature regulation would be the first issue that comes to mind. No more glands is a pretty big overhaul, as well as the fact that your skin is where all of your nerve feelers are located. Perks, no acne, body odor, splinters, or other damage. Cool lights and stuff if you want. That sleek metallic shine, potentially way upgraded physical senses, but cons, you look like a robot. You'd be pretty conductive. I guess that could also be a perk. So surroundings of extreme temperatures could pose threats. Your skin absorbs a lot of things, so that would go away as well as the microbiome on it. That would make you much more readily sterile, but could also vector diseases that jump onto your exterior more easily. And another big thing I think of is tarnishing. We don't want an Elden Ring scenario on our hands. That being said, you would absolutely kill it at any Comic-Con or drag show you went to. We should all be so lucky as to live in the future Mason has imagined. Just think of it. Throngs of beautiful robot people in line to get Robo Patrick Stewart's autograph at Comic-Con before watching a real-life Transformer performance. And all the while, no one sweats or smells? Now that's paradise on Earth right there. Xavier Rausch said, I'd personally like to get my left arm modified for a more industrial-looking one with a similar look to the Clockwork virus sort of style for my own reasons, like being able to show off my taste in industrial stuff, being able to push and carry things easier with my non-dominant hand, or even just look more proud of myself. That is what I'd do if I could get my arm all mechanized. Who said style over substance is a bad thing? Rock that new Clockwork arm and usher in a new industrial fashion craze. All the coolest mechanized kids are doing it. Muhammad Kasadria Akbar said, I always wonder what it feels like to become a toaster. Oh boy, do we have an SCP for you. Jorok404 said, human evolution would probably just be, don't need sleep, don't need food, can be quick, can learn faster, cannot kill SCP-682 because nothing can. Hey now, have a bit more faith in the fully mechanized future. If we can beat sleep, then we can take on that overgrown lizard. Maybe. Minna Arashi said, I'd probably go with a full-body prosthesis like in the anime Ghost in the Shell, with several notable changes. The arms will be transforming rifles with the option to deploy blades either Mantis style, i.e. cyberpunk, or bayonets style. As for the legs, they would extend into a form that's similar to the hind legs like that of a canine or similar animal. I'd also have cloaking and enhanced hearing and eyesight, allowing me to see objects outside of the visible spectrum and listen in on conversations that are taking place in the next room. With this setup, I'd say I'd be something like a soldier or spy, as I imagine the upkeep on a body such as this would be high and military grade. Just imagine someone with mantis blades and extending legs jumping out at you from the shadows out of nowhere, screeching in your face. I'd say that any normal person would have to clean themselves up after witnessing such a sight. You know, we've talked about a lot of terrifying things on this channel, but the idea of walking down the street after a lovely night out at the robot pub
and suddenly seeing a figure leap out of the shadows, letting out an unholy screech as it brandishes its mantis blades and skitters towards you on long insectoid legs. Yeah, that's going to give us nightmares for a long time. Congratulations on coming up with the scariest upgrade in the comments section. Your prize is the sheer unadulterated terror of all unlucky enough to cross your path and keeping my therapist employed. Jacob Rathbone said, definitely a robotic arm that can split into 2 functional arms akin to General Grievous, and ears with a voice box that can allow me to speak and understand all languages. But the problem that could arise is that my voice box could glitch and get stuck in a language or accent for a time. I think having one of my eyes replaced with an artificial eye that can read all known languages would be helpful too. Wait, hold on. You're going to put a voice box in your ears? Assuming you meant ears and a voice box that are separate, this is a pretty useful upgrade. You could travel anywhere you want without needing to bring a language dictionary or a translator. As long as you hit up the cyber pharmacy for your regular dose of antiviral software, you shouldn't have to worry about getting stuck on any one language. Make sure you let people know about your artificial eye though, so they don't think you're flirting with a wink when you're just trying to read a street sign. Shy Griff said, quite simply, I would infect myself with SCP-217, and then do what an infected D-Class did and use SCP-212. I have no idea what the resulting upgrade will be, but I will put any of my improvements to good use. Edit, I would run myself through SCP-914 on the fine setting to work out any kinks. It takes a lot of ambition to attempt to DIY your own upgrade, and there's definitely a place for that in this new world. We love the energy, but before you wind up hurting yourself with unpredictable anomalies that might wind up turning you into something unrecognizable, maybe you should put the YouTube tutorial down. Save yourself the agony and head to a certified professional instead. Tyler Tracy said, what I thought of was some kind of energy upgrade. In our fast world, allowing people's minds and hearts to run perfectly without sleep would enhance everyone's lives, completely without side effects. Sure, there is an occasional report or two saying this and that about sleepwalking or coming miles from where they had hit the hay with no memory of how it happened, but as for me, friends, I've never been better since my upgrade. Get your upgrade and be your best self. Well, this seems completely legit to me. No follow-up questions needed, especially not about the sleepwalking or waking up in strange places. That's all probably completely fine. You heard Tyler. Get your upgrade today and be your best self. Just hope you don't walk over the edge of a cliff while you're getting your 8 hours in. Chungo McChungus said, I love your name by the way, I would have additional mechanical arms attached to myself so that I can pet so many more mechanical animals. Like Furbies. They are heralds of our gear-gifting god, I am sure of it. Maybe have an antenna on my head that causes screens to produce slight amounts of static on the picture. You know, just for fun. So, just to clarify, your plans for upgrading your limited human form in the new age of machines is getting more arms so you can pet the wild Furbies that will roam the streets and a pranking antenna. Sounds like you've got a great handle on your priorities. Chungo McChungus knows what living the good life is all about. Seth Cushman said, probably would include solar panels or some way to plug into a power source so that you can recharge energy while sleeping or something instead of eating. Also maybe some sort of light or flashlight thing. And maybe a machine that converts CO2 back into O2. Also, this is more flesh-based, so might not apply, but maybe surgically move my brain into my chest or something somehow so that all my vital organs are in one spot, and I have just one major weak point, chest, instead of 2, chest and neck or head. Oh boy, where to begin with this one? The renewable energy and air purification are all well and good, but what happens to your neck once you move your brain into your chest? What happens to your head? Will you put your face on your chest or keep your face and head where they are, just with an empty skull and a breeze blowing in one ear and out the other? Won't your neck still be a weak point because your throat and esophagus are there and the airway could still be blocked or damaged? I have to move on to the next response before I get a headache, or as you would say, a chest ache. Nightingale said, built-in respirator. Unless part of this Clockwork takeover involves switching to 100% clean energy, and seeing as you specifically name-drop the sect that has the whole steampunk thing going on, a respirator will be necessary to avoid dying of some lung disease from the increase of pollutants in the air. A very thoughtful and kind of depressing answer. Why stop there? Scrap the lungs altogether and eliminate the need for breathing at all. Then it doesn't matter how rancid the air gets. Better get rid of your sense of smell too, if we're being honest. Young Love said, literal finger gun upgrades. Replace my arms up to my elbows, and where I reload would be by putting in bullets in the base of my wrist, like putting in coins in an arcade machine. With inner workings functioning similar to a 9-round mag for a .308 hunting rifle. Firing with twice as much force when shot because my replaced limbs would cycle back all of the carbon and other gases back into the chamber to make it not only louder, but deadlier, with a higher velocity to hit targets from farther away. Finger guns. Actual finger guns. Everyone you meet will be on edge. They'll never know if you're just being a cool, friendly dude or if you're about to blow their head off. They won't be able to tell until it's too late. No notes. This is just plain awesome. Cheesy Miner said, I would wish to become completely mechanical, solely for the purpose of calling anyone that still has exposed skin meatbags. That is a perfectly valid reason, and we here at SCP Explain condone any and all meatbag bullying once Mechane has become ruler of all. Laugh at them and their failing organic bodies. Oh, you've got flesh still, can't afford metal skin? Did your mom give you those internal organs? Loser. Francisco Souza said, I would have a special compartment in my wrist that stores all the methane in my body, and then release the pressurized gas and set it ablaze. It's stupid, and that's why it's perfect. This is incredible. You have the chance to change anything about yourself, and you went with weaponized farts. You're right, it is perfect, and it's a great way to embarrass your enemies mid-combat while dealing a ton of damage. Hey honey, how was the battle today? I don't want to talk about it. Oh dear, what's that smell? I said I don't want to talk about it! That's phenomenal. The Shy Puppet said, a chainsaw for a hand so that I can, quote, dispose my enemies more easily, end quote. And after a long day of horrific carnage, when you just want to curl up on the couch and relax, you can chop firewood in a snap. Dweemer Smith said, eliminating individualities in the brain would cause everybody to think alike, and no one would disagree or be disloyal. Well, this is just one commenter who should never be in charge of a post-apocalyptic society. Noted. Just gonna slowly back away from this one. Atris Hayport said, I would simply have my mind uploaded to a computer. Once it's data, it can go anywhere and can be put into anything. My concern is that once I am no longer in a human body, I would lose all emotion and drive to do anything, because usually that's governed by our complex meat sacks. But if I had some sort of sliders, I could adjust everything about myself that I think would be enough. But the actual goal is to experience everything. And when there's no more universe, when I'm in space watching everything implode, give out one remaining chuckle as I put myself in an infinite dream, only to wake if the universe reignites so I can watch it. This is a pretty grand idea. But one quick question. If there's no more universe, what would happen to the computer you're stored on? It would be part of the universe, correct? Not trying to rain on your immortality parade, but the mechanics of this one, pun intended, are a bit confusing. You'll figure something out though, once you've got that superpowered data brain, probably. Prophet of the 8th Legion said, from the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me. I craved the strength and certainty of steel. I aspired to the purity of the blessed machine. You can cling to your flesh as if it will not decay and fail you. Litany of the Omnissiah's Chosen. Hey everybody, the life of the party is here. Thanks for that, Prophet of the 8th Legion. It was quick, to the point, and just terrifying enough to set the tone for the rest of the day. Death to the old flesh, long live the machines. Am I right?